Hello, hello everyone, welcome. Don't have quite as much prepared as I normally do. It's going to be something of a chiller session today. There we go, that's the brightest. I was going to start today by going over the basics of some common fabric types and how to paint them or illustrate them. And then for whatever questions or specific things you want to learn how to do, I'm happy to answer. Oh, music is a bit loud. Thank you very much. How's the music now? I swear, playing with the settings, it'll never be done. We'll do it this way. For once I might actually use a graphite pencil, imagine that. I normally avoid graphite pencils because they can make watercolors dirty and muddled, but for today I don't necessarily need the color, or I won't be sketching with the pencil quite as much as I would be normally. Yeah, I think that's a bit too small for what we're doing today. I'm starting by just making some shapes to fill in. Mishmashy, hello, welcome. We're doing something a little different today. Instead of a complete illustration, I'm going to instead going over more basic techniques and methods for creating certain looks in watercolor specifically, but you could use a lot of this with other traditional art mediums, or even digital art, although I must confess I am not familiar with digital art, so anything involving that I won't be able to offer much insight on, but as a traditional artist, I'm sure there are some things that cross over. I thought I would start by illustrating some of the textures beyond the basic ones you use in clothing, and then from there we could move on to more interesting things like fabric folds, how to make something appear transparent, stuff like that. I think this will be the most clearly you will ever see my sketching phase. I don't like sketching with graphite. It can make watercolors appear dirty and dulled, which may be what you want, but for fashion illustrations you want a really bright pop of colors, so I tend to avoid graphite pencils, even though they are easier to erase. Sometimes having something easy to erase just means that you spend more time noodling on decisions, because you can go back and forth and back and forth. If you have a more, if you work with something a little harder to erase, like colored pencil, or some artists I know just go straight into it. Not me though. But if you work with something that's harder to erase or can't be erased at all, it means you, it means you kind of just have to go for it. There we are. The dirty one was on the wrong side. I'm not particular about a lot of things, but I am particular about making sure my water cups stay on the right side. Now, for the fashion illustrations I've done in the past, I normally leave out much of the design process that depicts what is what. And that is more so a time save for the sake of these live streams than anything else. If I was to make a very serious illustration, especially for a client, I would take the extra time to really depict what it is that you're seeing. But since these are not for a client, I save everyone involved a little bit of extra time. With almost anything, not everything, but with most things involving traditional art, you're going to want to lay down your base color. Now, your base color, in most cases, not all cases, is going to be a light or occasionally a mid-tone of the eventual color you want to create. With watercolor especially, you can almost exclusively work light to dark. That'll work for a start. And in the next slot over, I'm going to immediately contradict myself by showing an instance where you work from dark to light instead. Even just filling in boxes, it is so much fun seeing the color on the page. It's gotta be one of my favorite parts about painting. And while these first layers are drying, I will pull up some of the image references I'll be using for today. There we are, there are some reference photos. And again, if anyone has any questions or anything they would like to learn how to make specifically, please let me know. This live stream, that's what this live stream is all about. While I'm waiting for these layers to dry, I think I'm going to have some tea. Clown ruffles and layered clothing. Well, I can definitely, I'm not sure about, I'm not sure about clown clothing, but I can show you how to make ruffles and clothing with lots of flounces and poofiness. So, once we go over the basics of different fabric design, I can do that. Or you know what? While we're waiting for this to dry, I can do that for you. And the tea tonight is a peppermint sage, and I didn't show you the teacup before, but it's got this lovely floral design and a sort of bell design to it. It's very pretty. Let me just hide this. There, now you should be able to see my paper while I work. So there are, I'm just gonna make another little space for myself down here. There are really what I'd classify as 2.5, 3 kinds of ruffles. The most basic form of ruffle would be something that's made for a pleat. So I'm just gonna give myself a little more room here to show it. Now all of this is going to look just a bit weird because it is just in a box shape and not on a person, but this is just a principle more than anything. So it's always good when you're working with any sort of pleat or ruffle to start with a basic outline of the shape. And then you can start by making these little, I don't know how to describe it other than very tight S shapes. And don't worry, I'll give you a close-up once I finish with the sketch. Ruffle fun, yes. Ruffles are very fun. There's something that I still find myself adding to lots of designs, even when I'm trying to save time, just because they're so much fun. Alright, so here is a close-up of a good way to start a basic ruffle or a pleat. It's even, and then to finish it out, what you do is you draw straight lines up from each point. The higher ones go out in front, and the ones in the back recede. And you can make these straight or angled. I'm making them angled to make them a bit more visually dynamic to see in such a basic state, but the angle of the line really only affects how it seems the gathers were constructed in the garment. So you can do it either way, play around with what you like. Oh great, come on, focus. Down here. I can't believe it's been unfocused this whole time. There we go. And then so that makes the outer pleat. Then for the under pleat, because there's still fabric there, you're still just gonna want to draw tiny little straight lines going up from each lower little shape. So your end result looks like that. And now this is something that you normally see on the base of a skirt, but you can just as easily do something else. You can do the same thing on something that is much shorter, and this would be an excellent design to put on sleeve cuffs or collar cuffs to make that gathered look. It's just a very simple back and forth. It's almost like drawing the pronged parts of a puzzle piece. And a good rule of thumb when drawing ruffles is whatever little C shape or curve is higher is what will be in front, and whatever is lower is what will be drawn in the back. So if you just start by drawing those straight lines in the front and then add the ones in the back, you'll get a very neat and organized looking pleat. Now on the flip side, you can do something that looks much more random. Don't mind me while I just sketch in the basic outline for these. So the first option was for something that's very orderly. There's a uniform pleat to the pleats. This will be for something that is more abstract, and for it you'll want to make the same shapes as in this design, but do it much more randomly instead of this very structured pattern. Here you can see I've drawn a much more chaotic line than the first one. This leads itself to a much more wild and full looking gather than option 1. And again, starting with the higher of these little swirls, I'm drawing lines that go upwards. And then again, from the lower ones, I'm just drawing little lines that disappear up into the back to represent the hidden pleat. And I'll do the same thing on this second example as well. And then again, draw up from the highest point. Then from the lowest point. The graphite's smudging all over my hands. Now I see why I don't use this as much. But as you can see, it's a very similar technique, but creates very different outcomes. And you can use either. I'd say the easiest ruffle to start with is the more uniform design, and especially if you're using it for like a collar or something, it's a good one to start with. I normally use this one more, especially for skirts and things, but it really depends. Just play with it and see how you feel. What color would you like me to make the ruffles? I'd like to use the colors so I can show how shading and depth really brings ruffles like this to life. And I remember you also mentioned wanting clown clothing and red, purple. We'll make one red and one purple. That'll match the color scheme we already have going on. So again, just like with the top examples that we're working on, I'm putting down a base color that will be adjusted later. I love the ruffle that some clowns wear around the neck. And for that, you could really use either one of these methods. It just depends on which you prefer. while we let these dry, I will show you a little illustration of how to make puffy clothing. I'm going to start by drawing the silhouette of an arm. I'm going to show you how to make this puffy clothing with a sleeve, but the same thing, the same technique applies to pants, applies to shirts, applies to just about anything. It's just a sleeve is the easiest thing to depict this with. A very anatomically accurate hand. Now for any item of clothing to be puffed, it needs to come into something, it needs something to hold it in place. So for our example today, I'll be using this wrist cuff, and you know what? Today would be a great time to show off how these methods over here can be used to make a roughly sleeve or collar. And when working on such a small scale like this one, I almost always prefer to use the red method, but you can use either. And unlike in these examples, the part that's ruffled sticks out further than the rest because there's more fabric there holding itself out. So again, I did the same sort of back and forth movement that I did here, just on a much smaller scale. And again, I'm drawing those same lines that I did before, just on a smaller scale. Now it comes time for the puff sleeve part. Unless a garment of clothing has some sort of stiffener in it, like a hoop skirt or crinoline, boning, something to make it hold its shape unnaturally, it will always, or the fullest part of a garment will always droop down. So even if your sleeve is of equal fullness all the way down, the majority of it will pool at the bottom because the natural weight of the fabric pulls it down. So the fullest part of your garment will always be near the base where it's being bound together. And again, this is whether or not it is a pant or a sleeve. We're using a sleeve as an example today, and I'll actually be illustrating it as though it's made out of chiffon, just so that you can see the arm underneath. Got the elbow right there. So for anything that's full like this, it will have gathers in it. But because the majority of the weight is being pulled down, the gathers are very easy to draw. I can show you a little cheat for it. You just want to go inside the lines you've already drawn for the outline, and then just add some lines like this going upwards. And you always want the lines here to match the curve that the sleeve is experiencing. And lines like this can be a singular line, or this sort of A shape that I have here, or they can form a sort of V shape, but they will never form an X or anything like that. So here, again, in black and white, it's a little difficult to tell, but these represent the sleeve, or this represents the arm here, and these curves on the outside are the sleeve, and these little squiggles are all you really need to insinuate the gathers, especially on something that's really puffed out. Let's put down some base color for that as well. I'm going to make the skin on this a little darker so you can really tell where the sleeve starts and where the skin is. And don't panic. I know this looks like a carrot right now, but as soon as I put this on, I'll be mixing on a darker color, and that will make it look like very realistic darker skin. But while that dries, how about I get back? I can't work up there yet, but I will get back to working on these gathers. Now, to really show what a gather looks like, you need to add shading to it. And I'm just here mixing up a darker red. Shadows are darker, and you can either do that by making your color and mixing in black, but I tend to like to mix in other colors to keep it from losing its vibrancy. So that little under part needs to be shaded, and then along each of these lines needs to be shaded as well. And you can see already how just a little bit of color really brings out those pleats. Same thing for this lower example here. some shade to this purple skirt. That's a little bit too dark. Oh no! It's alright, everybody calm down. Crisis averted. And this is a very extreme example of shading. If you're doing it on a real piece of clothing, you can do it more subtly. I'm just really hyping up the contrast, making it brighter and darker so you can really see what I'm doing. And I know you mentioned your goal is to make a clown ruffle. So those are traditionally white. It doesn't have to be white, but if it is white, a good choice of color for shading would be a light purple or a light blue. You can use gray, but that tends to make illustration with a little less life in it. I really like using blue for my whites, but I will occasionally use purple. Alright, now let's make this skin on this arm a little less orange, shall we? I'm picking up some brown, just a smidge of that purple to cool it down a little bit, not much. And then, look at that. A beautiful chocolatey color. Now while we let that dry, let's move on to the final steps over here. The deepest little parts of these need to be shaded even further. They're the darkest part. But look at that. Without any lines, we've already created something that looks beautifully gathered. I will probably add some lines just to create better visual clarity. But that's the cool thing, when you understand what's supposed to be dark and what's supposed to be light, you don't even need to add inking lines. Of course, again, sometimes adding those will help with your clarity, but paying attention to what's light and what's dark really helps more than anything else. And while we let that dry, I'm going to get some tea. Ah. I mean, just look at that. Beautiful gathers. There we go. There it is. There's my .2 pen. I was looking for it. Again, I'm just adding inking lines so you can better see the form of the illustration, but that is not a necessity when doing your own work. It's more of personal taste and style than anything. And I'm just tracing over those initial lines. To bring out the shape once more of the ruffles. Or at least the lines that I can. Things are still a bit wet. good start to the inking. In the meantime, I'll finish up this sleeve. What color should I make this sleeve? What color? I suppose what color would you like to see shaded with watercolor the best? Because the techniques you use for traditional shading and digital shading are a bit different. Alright, we have a vote for green. I'm not sure how green would look on this spread, so I'll do a blue-green. I think I can make a blue-green work. You start by getting your color. And this is a very light color. And when you're painting a light color over a dark color like this, it's important to move the brush very quickly and lightly. Otherwise, it will combine too much with the color underneath. While that dries, I'm going to move back to the art designs up here. From left to right, we have a satin, an example of a lace, and a tweed. While we wait for these to dry down here, I will show you how to make a tweed. Just picking up some of this teal I already have on my palette, using a pretty dry brush to really get that sort of texture. You are going to want to make bigger clumps that go into smaller clumps like this. And normally you don't want your brush to get super dry, because that's when you'll get a sort of scraggly look to it. But in this instance, the scragglier you can get it, the better. fabric is woven in a weave. So, or tweed fabric is woven in a weave. That means where half the fabric is going in one direction and half is going in the other, making like these little boxes or squares or X's, however you want to think of it. And emulating that is a good way to make any sort of textured fabric. I'm showing you this with tweed because tweed has a very big, bulky shape to it, but it applies to anything. Even, say, denim has this similar weave look to it. I'm just grabbing some purple to do the next part. And tweed is one of those weaves that is very random, so just follow this cross-hatching sort of pattern, but don't try to control it too much. And there we have it. You can play with adding more colors or less, but that is the basic principle for anything involving tweed or denim, plaid, anything like that. Second cup of tea. Now back to the finishing touches on these gathers down here. I wish I knew a better way to describe this shape because it is so essential to drawing gathers, and once you get a feel for it, it's very easy to replicate, but it does take a bit of practice. thank you. I really appreciate you saying that you think I make it look easy. A lot of it just comes with practice. And of course, all this becomes much harder once you're trying to do it on a person or on a drawing of a person and not just a little square. But doing it in little squares is a great way to start. Alright, well here is your example of pleats. Pleat option number 1, a much more organized shape. Pleat option number 2, a much more chaotic shape. And an example of a more billowing garment, and pleat option number 1 in practice. I'm going to be enjoying my second cup of tea while I let that dry, and then I'm going to move on to giving you an example of silk or satin and lace. If anyone has anything else that they'd like to see a quick tutorial for, just let me know. Ah, that's some good refreshing tea. Yes, refreshing tea is very nice, Mishmashy. It's something that I really wish more people would be open to experiencing. Mm-hmm. I've heard some people say that, oh, tea is just leaf juice, it's not worth having, but you're right, they really don't know what they're missing, Mishmash. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going in and sketching a little bit of the shape of the shadows, not the highlights. Now, I've just added in some shading or some pre-shading lines so I can keep everything straight myself, but you do not necessarily have to do this. It all comes down to what you're comfortable with. I'm doing here is just going along and softening this line. So that the blur with the shadow is a little bit smoother. I'm not going to do this everywhere, but just in a few places to make it a little less stark. And there we are. Now for the example of lace. Lace is, for the most part, white. I've seen some very beautiful colored lace, but just as an example of how you can use, go from dark to light in watercolor, I'm going to be using the traditional white lace. Now you could use a lot of things for this. I'm using white ink because my Posca pen is currently out of ink, but that would honestly be my preference to use for this. Now for lace, really just about anything goes, although floral motifs, you know, flowers, leaves, that sort of thing, are very popular. When I make lace, I like to start in a corner and work my way out from there. And this is more detailed than what I normally do for lace. I would normally do something a bit less detailed. But because it's so big, I thought I might as well really go ham with it. There are exceptions, of course, but lace is generally comprised of curves and swirls and dots. I've put up a picture of pretty standard lace on the screen, pretty small, but it gives a good idea of what your average lace is. Of course, there are laces that are more detailed and less detailed, more floral and less floral, but I thought the piece up there currently gives a pretty good idea of an average lace. Look at that, beautiful. place finished. Thank you very much. Now to just add shadows to the darkest parts of this illustration right here. Oh, I'm so happy you enjoyed yourself. I was feeling a little bit uninspired today, so I thought, you know what? Sometimes on days when you're feeling like that, a little uninspired, instead of forcing yourself to create, sometimes it can be good to just say, you know what? Let's make something different today. Now to frame them. information for today. Not as exciting as normal, but I thought it would be both fun and educational to go over just some different elements of design and of fashion illustration. I'm so happy to hear that you liked it. Just a little heads up, there will be no live stream next week. And then I will be playing around with different schedules for the live stream. In June, I will start live streaming on Saturday evenings instead of Friday, which is somewhat of a big change, so I thought you would like to know. This was sort of a creative exercise for myself as well, doing something different, but I really enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll do something again in the future. There's a lot more fabric I could go over. I could go over leather, I could go over chiffon, I could go over furs and things like that. And all sorts of different things. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and I won't talk to you next week, but I'll do this again week after Saturday, so I look forward to seeing you then. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for watching.